Anywho, all right, we are going to call the meeting to order here at 8:08 a.m. I will, for the record, Selena Miranda, Finance Committee member, is no longer in school committee. Her term ended yesterday, and so it's just Amanda and I, as well as other members here. The jump down to, we obviously got the good news about the override. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more tonight, full school committee, but thank you everybody for all of your work on that. We have the FY25 budget report. We have the fee schedule, which I think we should talk about first, just because we need to vote on that tonight. And then we have kind of discussion of presentations, I think, for the town meeting, just to make sure we're on the same page about those. So it's all right with everybody. We can start with the fee schedule, which there is a copy in the finance folder for today. I cannot project this, but I assume everybody can pull it up. Do you want to just do a recap of where we stand?
Sure. So at the last meeting, or at previous meetings, we've talked about changes to a number of the fees in the fee schedule. So the fee schedule that is in the folder, I tried to go through and update that last increased column to reflect the appropriate fiscal years of when we had, when the fee increase was most recently approved. So you should be able to see that reflected in the chart. For today, the one change that is reflected on the fee schedule, but we haven't previously discussed, is an update to the music program fee. And it says music program, there's a reference to the high school because the program is held here at the high school. And so I worked with the applied music lesson program director, Rebecca Damiani, to take a look at the fees and go through the process of saying, if we were going to increase the fees, kind of what is an appropriate rate to increase it to. The lesson fees hadn't been increased since September of 2022. And because the lesson fees hadn't been increased, the rate that we are paying the instructors also had not increased. And so we just felt like it was an appropriate time to increase the fee so that we could also provide a corresponding rate increase for the, or corresponding pay increase for the music lesson providers. And so Rebecca went through and pulled some comparisons to other schools in our district, in the MMEA Eastern District, which is the district that the music program participates in, to look at the rates. And she pulled the rates for the 30-minute lessons for the 24-25 school year. And so we are, and I didn't provide this, I absolutely can provide this information, but we are well within the comparable districts. Our rates are actually on the lower side compared to some of the other districts in the MMEA Eastern District. So we felt like it was appropriate to, we wouldn't be either the most expensive or the least expensive district. So the proposed change is the current lesson rate is $30 per 30-minute lesson. And that's for a private lesson, $19 for a 30-minute lesson for a semi-private lesson. And so the lesson rate increase would be $33 for a 30-minute lesson. And that's for the private lessons. So a $3 increase. And then it would be $22 for a 30-minute semi-private lesson. And that is also an increase of $3. So there is also, in addition to the lesson charge, there's also a registration fee. What the registration fee does is it covers some of the overhead for the program, but then it also covers for some of the students that may not be able to afford to pay for the lessons, it does cover funding for a number of scholarships for those students so that they're able to participate even if they aren't able to afford the lesson fee. And so that registration fee is currently $45, and that's per session. So if you participate, you have to pay the $45 registration fee for each one of the sessions. We're proposing to increase it to $50 per session. And again, that gives us the ability to cover our overhead. That's the stipend for the program director and those scholarships. The $50 fee has not, similar to the lesson fee, it hasn't been increased since 2022. So all of those changes, all of that information is reflected in the new proposed fee schedule. And then some of the other changes that we had talked about briefly before were just updates to the community schools before school program, after school program. And those rates are in the fee schedule. And then just changes to student activities at both Pierce Middle School and at Milton High School.
When we look at things like the music program or some of those, when we're thinking about the costs, is it so that it is like cost neutral, so it's not costing us anything? Is that that's the goal for all? I mean, and is that something that we meet for all of those? Okay.
So for some of the programs, for the music program, for example, there is not any funding for these music lessons in the operating budget. So the fees that the students are paying or the families are paying are covering all of the costs. So it's a self-sustaining program. For the student activities, it's not self-sustaining. And so the fees that we are collecting or the revenue that we collect is only offsetting a portion of the expense. So for middle school and high school student activities, it's only a portion. The remainder of the expense is covered by the stipend budget in the operating budget.
And is that something, I think we had talked about this before, but looking at that, like across all of the clubs and activities and determining, like, is there almost like a tiered, or however you want to look at it, stipend, a way that the stipends are determined based on maybe the level of involvement or expertise needed to run that club?
So right now the stipends are determined, the payment for the stipends or the amount that the instructor or the teacher or whomever is leading the extracurriculars, that's all driven by the collective bargaining agreement. And so in the collective bargaining agreement, it just has a list of all of the clubs and activities that have ever run. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all funded in the budget. And I think the work that needs to be done is, and this is work that we can do kind of leading up to contract negotiations, is just to look at the stipends that we're currently paying, look and see if the rates are appropriate given what the club or activity, kind of the frequency, how many students are participating. So and then, of course, just making sure that we're staying within that club and activity budget, because we can't, I think that really is going to be so important for us moving forward, making sure that we, regardless of if it's listed in the contract or not, if we don't have the funding available, and there are other clubs that almost need to run. When we talked about the budget and kind of like the funding that was available to us, there are some clubs and activities at the high school that we essentially almost have to run to keep our NEASC accreditation. And I think it's just kind of like weighing the availability of funds and then what is actually running.
Any other questions on the fees?
Sorry, I do have one
Please.
other- And then I think, did we talk about, or if we did before, I'm sorry, I'm a little brain cramp today. For community schools, did we talk about sharing or presenting comparable or like where other communities are with respect to their, did we do that before? Did we present that?
I think,
There
yeah,
is
We did.
information, so I
Yeah.
can put a copy of that in the folder for today, but we are, when we looked at the comps, we're low
Yeah.
for community
Right,
schools.
I just think if
Mhm.
as we're having the discussion, that it would be
Mhm.
helpful to know where we fall.
Mhm. So I think there was a
I
chart
thought there was a chart, I thought I remember.
that I had shared. I'm not sure if it was in a presentation or if it was actually like just in a Google sheet, but I can find
I
that
think it
and
might
put
have
the
been in a
copy.
presentation.
Mhm.
yeah,
Was it
that's-
like in a school?
I can't remember if it was the December one when we first talked about this, and we
Right.
tabled this until, what, February.
I think it was the
Um,
most recent conversation that we had, which would have been maybe earlier in April or at the
Yeah.
end of March, but there was, we had a number of
Yeah,
comp
Yes,
districts.
yeah.
Mhm.
I recall that document. So I think that's right. To also just put in for the other school committee members
Yeah.
for tonight.
Sure.
as a
Yep, I can
reference
do that.
point.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And then the last thing. We had talked about, but then I think it was talking about not changing everything at once. Were we looking at the rentals, like the short-term and long-term?
I don't think we were
rentals?
looking at them this
year,
year.
but
They
the-
were things, yeah, because I agree with you. It's been so long since we increased them. We talked
Yeah.
about looking at that next year.
Yeah.
I think the other
okay.
piece, though, is that those are not don't impact the operational budget for next year. It's
It's
just
more
a
like
revolving
revolving
fund
fund. Okay.
and building that back up.
Okay.
Which is something that probably will need to happen because we're running it down over the last 2 fiscal years.
Yeah, and it looks like,
It's been a long time.
2014, 15.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Those are
6.
Mhm.
been the most
Wow.
consistent ones.
Yep, it's been,
I keep saying, you gotta, the rental of the auditorium for town,
mhm.
well, 100,000. Those are got.
I think
Right.
with the rental schedule, sometimes the schedule has everything kind of broken down. And so as we do that work, it will be interesting to look at how other school districts format their rentals. And if there's a way for us to potentially either simplify it or so that is definitely some of the work that needs to happen before we, I think, instead of just kind of rolling
Yes.
over and just updating each individual fee. Because a piece of it too, when it comes to the fees, is it's one thing to have a fee schedule listed,
Mhm.
but it's the administration of
Yeah.
it, right?
Right.
And so if we're not actually charging the fees and administering the programs in the way that it is listed and designed, then it won't matter what we charge.
Right.
Because there's no, we're not bringing that revenue in. And so I think if there's a way to kind of look at that, the overall rental program kind of holistically to say, is this making sense? Are we actually covering our costs? Are we bringing in appropriate revenue to be able to invest into these facilities that where they're community spaces, and there are so many people that are accessing them on a daily and annual basis, so we want to make sure that we can keep that revenue that's coming in. We're really investing in those facilities to keep them up to date and maintained well. So I think that can be a part of it too, but
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
not this year. Maybe
No.
we can, that could be a focus for next year.
And are these hourly? Is that an hourly rate?
I believe so.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you for putting together all the changes in this document.
Mhm.
And thanks for spending all the time walking us through.
Sure.
this. Given the missing the meeting from a couple, we don't have vote on the finance agenda for this
Okay.
item. This item actually fits under FY26 budget. It's not specifically listed with a vote. So for sake, I think we can just skip a vote and just have the full conversation at school committee. And I think there is a vote on the agenda for school committee tonight. So. Great. That's it for fee schedule. Jumping back to FY25 budget and the Q3 report. We had the very high level overview at school committee last week. Nobody could hear me. And guess, are there any questions or anything you want to particularly highlight again here, or that we weren't able to get into last week?
I think the format of this, it may have been converted from let me see. The Google Doc format is, I will update that when it was converted from a PDF to a Google Doc, the formatting. So I'll update that, so it is shared kind of in a way that is easier to read, so that way when we post it to the website, it's kind of again, it's just easier to read. I don't have any further updates other than I think for the quarterly report. The quarterly reports are always done kind of like with a specific end date. And it really is just going to be from this point forward, consistently updating the projections. So at this point, it's not as much of the general expense projections, although we still will have some transportation expenses for out of district students that may come up. A few different things, certainly not at the volume as the beginning of the school year and as we're kind of progressing through the fall and the winter. The big thing at this point in the year is going to be the salary expenses. And so in this pay period that we're currently processing that will hit the books, I believe it's a May pay period date because it's effective on Thursday. So it will be May 1st. We're paying a number of stipends. So we pay the stipends out twice a year, in November, in December, and then in May. And so that truly gives us the ability to see what that overall expense line is going to be, because there are some fluctuations in the stipends. So that information is coming in. I'll be able to update. It won't be a projection anymore. It will be an actual expense. And so that helps us to kind of firm up that ending balance number as we continue to make those payments throughout the end of the fiscal year. I think we'll just continue to do updated projections, even though it may not be a quarterly report, but we can just continue to provide kind of those year-end projections as we get closer to the end of the year. And then in June, we have those really important pay cycles of, we do the lump sum payments. So anyone that is a 26 pay employee, meaning they get paid throughout the fiscal year, they will get paid the lump sum. So they'll get that total payment for the summer, and that will happen in June. And so it's a lot of those salary expenses will start to get paid out, just making sure that our projections are reflecting what those expenses will be. So that way we have a really strong understanding of where we'll land at the end of the year. I haven't heard any updates on the circuit breaker funding from the state, but I know that had, it is still potentially going to be funded for this fiscal year. So I think there is, we're still very closely tracking that. But again, no updates since our last meeting and since the report was shared with you kind of at the school committee meeting.
We should probably just double check with Nick on the drop dead date for the June town meeting.
Sure.
Just as like, well, when if we need to.
in the event.
Yeah, in the event
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
over the 700, what is that? And have that
Okay,
circled and read on
Sure,
our calendars. Again, hopefully that's completely unnecessary, but. Be good to know. Any questions on any particular line items? Again, Anna, I'm looking at the spreadsheet, so if you are raising your hand, I'm not seeing you, please just jump in.
Okay, the only thing on the spreadsheet on the, sorry, I'm trying to figure out which page it is by doing it this way. Some of them, I think it's towards the end. The
Mhm.
formulas are funky on the right.
okay.
They're coming up. It just comes up. It's only for like. Where did it just go? Sorry. No, I don't see it. I'll go back to.
You said towards the end.
Yeah, it was towards the end. This was looking at it.
Are you looking in the doc, in the Google Doc?
No, I'm looking.
Okay,
I'm looking.
at the PDF.
Yeah, and. Where did it go? First, now I don't see it. Oh, wait. All right, I'll come back to it because I'm not seeing it now. It just.
Yeah.
That's weird.
The last page, I guess, start with a broader question. Each of these line items there are hundreds and hundreds of line
Yes.
items. Are all of these created by the school district just over time, or are all of these mandated by the state? Because I just know our line items are a bit different, although there's certain reporting where you have to report them within very specific ones for the state.
Yes.
But anyways, just I guess that was one question I had just as I continue
Yeah.
to read through.
Yeah.
Hundreds line items.
So each one of the account numbers, the school department has the ability to create account number
Mhm.
and account number if one doesn't already exist, where the expenses would fall under a certain category. So the state, the Department of Education, provides us with, they're called different account codes. And each one of the account codes creates an account string, which creates that account number, and it has the corresponding account name. And so DESI gives us very defined kind of function codes, object codes, like different codes that we have to use. And the combination of them is what is representative of what the expense is. And so if we have an expense, if something different comes up, or if it may be something that we haven't had to spend money on previously, we may potentially have to set up a new account. We do it based off of the information that's provided us from DESI. And it's a combination of different characteristics that make up the account number. I think in looking at this, it's really important to make sure that our accounts are clean and updated, because that's the information that we report to the state. And that information is what makes up our per pupil expenditures. And when the state breaks down each one of those category areas, the one that breaks down what we're spending in transportation or what we're spending in our instructional costs, that is very much driven by these accounts and the way that we're setting up our chart of accounts.
Can I piggyback on that for a second? So when I look at there are some where there are no costs. So for example, some of it was in, say, instructional materials. It's it listed out. And then similarly, like for special ed transportation, that just is the page I happen to stop on. There's a line, but then there are 4 lines under it that aren't. So are those what's the difference between the line between that and the others? And is that something that those need to be there? And or is it just that's a different, is it a different code of tuition to a special ed school? So it's determining the type of, they're like, they're sub categories within the category. Okay.
And the state very much wants us to report out our expenditures based on the school and the location. And they do that, and that information creates the district report card. And so the report card is information, and that really is in an effort to provide financial transparency to communities.
Mhm.
So they can look and they can see, well, what is the district spending money on, or how much are they spending on specific schools? And is there equity in that? Are they making sure that each one of the schools is funded appropriately based off of the demographics, all of that information? And so in some areas, instead of just having one one like overall category, you may see it multiple times because it's broken down by the school. And the state very much wants us to break that information down by the school. In some instances, it's hard to do that because it may be an expense that we just purchase it and then we distribute it. But that can create some of the redundancy when you see the account names and the account numbers in there too, because it will be listed multiple times because it's broken out by the school. I think the important thing when I look at the chart, when I look at the reporting, is sometimes what happens is when you have a budget and you are, and it's assigned to an account number, sometimes what happens in schools, not just specific to Milton, but just kind of like it, broadly, is that, people will spend money where the budget is. And I have really tried very hard, and I feel very strongly about saying, no, we have to reflect the expenses in the accounts that the expenses incurred, regardless if there's a budget or not, because that's what helps drive the budgeting process. To say, last year although there may not have been an assigned appropriation, there is an expense assigned to this account number. We're gonna reflect it accordingly. That way we can budget appropriately in the future. And so that's, in some instances, you'll see a line that's blank. There isn't a budget assigned, but then there is an expense. It's okay because we kind of categorize or we'll sum up by major cost center areas. But it's really important to do that so that then we can update the budget moving forward. I hope that makes sense. It's just kind of more of, I think sometimes when you look at the line level detail, I can kind of be like, oh, why are they spending there? There's no money, but it's really important to make sure that we're reflecting the expenses in the correct accounts.
Because it's rolling up.
Correct. Yes.
Right, and you might have a budget, a roll up, you have a budget
Yes.
for that category, but not necessarily for that code at that point. Okay.
And even for the high school, I think at the high school level, when you talk, like a good example would be instructional materials. At the elementary schools, we have one line for each one of the schools. At the high school, we may fund the instructional materials at the high school level, but it's then the budget further breaks it down by the content area. So it will say high school music, high school English, high school math, and assigning the expenses to each appropriate department helps us track to see what are we focusing, which area have we spent money on, which area may we need to focus on in the future, knowing that the funding really is at kind of like that top high school level, but it can be further broken down into the content area.
I just feel like this approach is such a shift that it's gonna be so helpful to continue explaining this, so that people will move towards absorbing that this is a totally different way of doing it.
Right. But I also wonder though, like for you, Katie, like this is the first year you're sort of taking it the way that it was and doing it this way. So I almost feel like the budget was built
Right.
with that in mind, but then this is going to, it's almost like just keep getting more refined and more better as you change as those practices change.
There is definitely some cleanup that can happen, I think, to make it, to make sure that we are charging to the right places. And I also think that in breaking down each one of the budget lines into the specific content areas or at the school level, that that really does help create that shared ownership of everyone is tracking the budget.
Mm.
It's not just me tracking it,
Right.
it's the directors are tracking their lines and the principals are tracking their lines, and everyone has an eye on the budget so that they know how much, what the budget has been appropriated, how much they can spend, and so that they can truly focus on spending the money on what we actually need instead of everything kind of being funneled through one mechanism or one person. And so everyone has been really, I think that is a big
Really
shift
good,
too. And I think there's been a lot of work that has happened. There's a lot of work that needs to continue to happen to make sure that that's a continuous process. And that also helps with the engagement when we're talking about creating a budget, because it's hard to say what you'll need if you don't even know what you have.
Right.
So that's just more work to continue to improve upon. So I think that will continue certainly into the future.
So I'm thinking about, I remember at Citizen Speak, and a citizen got up and asked about the budget, and I think they were asking about sort of, even at a more granular level, sort of in the sense of like copiers or, do you know what I mean? Like some, I think, and so I think is what you're saying, like that will then, this change in practice would then almost like populate the budget and in that way, so that it is on a more granular level, so that you know that at Glover, this is for copiers or copy paper or whatever the case may be, whereas it might have been going to a different line item.
Yes.
So, which is where they were used to putting it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, because
that would
that's
be-
where the budget was.
Right.
And
yeah.
it's like, we don't just assign it to where the budget is, you
You-
put it in the appropriate line, and
Right.
then the budget should, we need to make sure that the budget is reflective of
Right.
that.
So it's a change in process across.
It
the
is,
board.
yeah,
Okay.
it is, it's a shift.
It's a shift. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's helpful.
Mhm.
Needed. Thank you.
Guess a couple things on that. Is there a way to, within these reports? Because I'm approaching this and thinking about public looking at these documents,
Yes.
like it is not an easy to read document.
It's not, no.
And so like, what are the ways in which we can make this report
Mhm.
better
Mhm.
for us and our own understanding, but also the public? And so it's all the blank, like the second to last page is essentially just like blank.
Blank.
And so like, is there a way in which we can just filter out like any accounts that are essentially inactive, like that historically were used? I'm not sure if they can be closed, period, but at least filter them off this. I think the other thing I've wondered is the organization in terms of like what is where, I assume is linked to account numbers, which we're not
Yes.
seeing. And so it's like the lowest account number to highest. But there's not actually a, like, it's not actually in my mind clear as to like, okay, we're talking about custodial salaries here, and then later on, it's like custodial overtime or custodial supplies. And like salaries are kind of mixed throughout. And even the different like schools are somewhat close together in things, but sometimes they jump. So yeah, I don't know if there's something we can do or discuss around like how do we think about the grouping or ordering to make it feel like it's clear to say, hey, here are the facilities related expenses, here are the like materials, operating supplies related expenses, here are the salary related expenses. I also got to imagine it's very confusing because the way we structure it at our place is like we have a line item, but then we have a program.
Mhm.
The program is what connects it to the school. Not the like, we don't have a separate line item for every school. Is that how it works here too? And it just, when you print the report, it consolidates those two into separates, or I don't know if this is a limitation of the system. But it seems like we have, again, a separate line item for Tucker Heating Buildings, Cunningham Heat of Buildings, oil, Ellicott, like you have, and then you have a network or district wide.
Mhm.
So you have, what's that, 7 different accounts all for one line item.
Mhm. So the way it was, okay. So
Sorry.
just to start with the reporting.
Yeah, sorry.
So the first financial report was done with a memo that just kind of provides context.
Yeah,
And then it was all of this information, but it was broken into cost centers. And then it was broken out by general expense and salary.
yeah,
So that was more of, that's how, when I've shared quarterly reports in the past, that's typically the format.
Yeah.
It's a higher level
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
summary of all of this information. Because of the financial status in December,
Mhm.
and because of the questions that had arisen from, well, you're in a deficit, what's gonna happen next year?
Yep.
That's when I shifted or changed the report from being that more of like that summary data report to this is everything.
Yes,
You're
yeah.
seeing everything.
Yeah.
So, and this is the everything report that we shared the budget in.
Mhm.
However, with the budget presentation, there's also exhibits that do just what you were
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about, like kind of that summary. And so all of the information is here. I think it's just a matter of what is appropriate to share in a quarterly report, what is appropriate to share as our budget presentation.
Right.
And I can do anything, like I can do any of, or
Yeah.
a combination.
Yeah.
It's just whatever is kind of helpful, and I think what is like kind of, what makes the information consumable for the public, for us here, because it truly was like the intent was just to show this is the information, nothing is, this
Yeah,
is
not even
everything.
filtered.
Like a
Yeah.
brain dump.
Right,
Right.
and you can see what the expenditures are and what the projection is for this year, but this file also shows what the budget is for next year.
Mhm.
And so, but I think when I've always presented the quarterly reports as that summary information because that was appropriate at the time. That was being in the scenario of not projecting a budget deficit.
Yeah.
So being able to roll up the information was,
Mhm.
providing the information at an appropriate level. And so again, I'm happy to provide the information, whatever format
Yeah.
makes sense. And I think as we kind of like,
Yeah.
just in moving forward, if there's a change or if there's something where we say, maybe it's not a quarterly report, maybe it's a quarterly report, but it looks different, then I'm happy to do whatever kind of works the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the balance is, what is the system limitations, and obviously like not
Yeah.
creating some type of report
Right.
that is very manual, that's not
Right.
use of time. So,
Yeah,
but maybe this, in my mind, this gets back a little bit to what you had flagged
Recovery.
previously. Yeah, like looking at other
Just, yeah.
finance
Yeah.
committees and
And
what
also-
are the types of reports they
yeah.
get.
And also even just what you've found, like what you've done in the past and found helpful, like sort of what you were just saying, like, are there ways that you've done it historically that are helpful?
there is definitely some work too. I think I had mentioned it maybe at the warrant committee meeting that we attended earlier, but there is work that is being shared for my business officials association, just around best practice of
Mhm.
what other business officials are sharing with the school committee and they're sharing with their communities in regards to the quarterly reporting. And so in a couple of weeks, we have a conference for the business officials. So that's more information that if it's helpful, I can try to kind of get samples of how the information is shared in other communities, if that would be helpful to you all too. So that you can just kind of see. And whatever is kind of the best way to summarize the information. We can do that.
Yeah, they can share it. I think that's something we can look at
Look at
the
in the
remainder
future.
of this
Yeah.
year and into next year.
Mhm.
Great. Any other questions on the Q3 report? Okay, and
I just have a general question about going forward.
Mhm.
You mentioned, Mark, about checking the deadline for June. So
Mhm.
is there a plan, or maybe that can be like outlined tonight for what our process over the next few weeks to make sure that, if it, hopefully unlikely event, we need to do something, that there's a plan for like tracking this enough in the real, to be ready to not, to
Yeah.
do that if necessary.
You mean like if it doesn't, are you talking about like state funding doesn't come?
Yeah, basically,
Mhm.
or if some other like huge unexpected, I don't know, like, yes, mainly the
Yeah.
tracking the timing.
State, yeah, the state funding didn't come in, that's a big problem.
Yeah, that's the big. I mean, it's almost $500,000, so
Yeah.
that really is a,
Well, we won't, if
Really
that's, we're gonna have to do, like, having what's our plan B,
Right.
yes.
basically.
Yes.
To make sure that we
Yeah.
would not miss the opportunity to go to the June town meeting if we have to, if the circuit breaker doesn't come in,
Mhm.
we'll have to.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll have to figure it out with the town, how what we
Yeah.
do to close that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that starts with like, just what is the drop dead date for the June?
Yeah.
Piece, and then, you said, when were we looking at? Are you doing like end of April report or like May, middle? I guess we could do a report kind of around that
Mhm.
time, whatever that drop dead date is. If it's May 15th, we try and have one
21st.
for school committee.
So like, if there's action that we need to take, it would probably need to be at that meeting.
Okay. So for the reporting from now until the end of the year, it really is. It will partially be driven by the processing payroll.
Yeah.
So payroll will post, I think it's May, we have 3 pay periods. So I'm just trying to look at the calendar to see if it makes sense to, if we press payroll on the 15th. It's then waiting for that to be posted, so it may just make more sense to do maybe run a report at the end of next week, which will include this first pay cycle. But regardless, I think that if we're saying we have a meeting on the 21st, then we'll have projections ready so that we can talk about what the
Okay.
next steps would be.
Great.
In the timing.
Yeah, and just also, even if stuff comes through, if we are projecting at $701,000,
Right.
it's still like a $1,000 that deficit we're gonna have to go back to the town for. So
Right.
we are. And hopefully all that is not an issue.
Wait, how much time like, do you get from the standpoint of the state saying, yes, it's going to happen? Is it sort of, are there set meetings where it's discussed? Are there just, do you know what I mean? Like, is it sort of like, okay, they're having the finance meeting, the governor's meeting around such and such, and so at that date it will be discussed, or is it just sort of arbitrary? I'm gonna go with arbitrary, right?
It is, so I don't have enough experience because it's part of a supplemental budget.
Okay.
I think the supplemental budget doesn't follow the defined kind of, because with the state budget for the upcoming fiscal year, it's the governor's budget and then it follows kind of like the hearing schedule of the Senate and the House. With the intent of having everything finalized so that so the budget is appropriated and voted and approved as of July 1st. But with a supplemental budget, this supplemental budget that is specific, that has a circuit breaker funding, seems to be following a similar timeline, but with previous supplementals that I've seen, there's a quicker timeline to kind of go back and be appropriated
Right.
because it's
For
for
that
a
fiscal year.
specific
Right.
fiscal year. And so I don't have good clarity, which is making me really uneasy about saying like,
Yeah.
okay, this is the date that we're gonna know.
Right.
Yeah.
I do know though, in the past, what has happened was when there was supplemental funding, that the Department of Education has put that funding in the last quarterly payment that is made for circuit breaker, and we usually receive that on like June 30th. So it's at the very end of the fiscal year, so it doesn't give us much time.
All right. Thank you for all your work tracking this and doing what we can.
Mhm.
Anything else on the Q3 report? All right, then we'll jump to the town meeting presentations.
Mhm.
So it seems to me there are two presentations we need. Right? We need to do our normal budget presentation, which I assume we'll just pull from combination of warrant committee, public presentations we've done, the select board. So that one we've got lots of slides on.
Mhm.
And then the other one is related to the $700,000 movement that town meeting will need to do. And that, to me, it seems like, again, that's essentially just the select board presentation we did when we asked them
Mhm.
to move the million, they chose to do the 700,000. So it's just that. And then obviously using updated numbers within the projections.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But those seem like the two. Is that right?
Yeah.
Anything else finance wise or anything else we haven't shared previously that we think we need to put some slides together on for our meeting?
I think so. I'm Look at the 700 again.
I do have a question about, override, non-override, since we took the path of townwide vote first.
Mhm.
And obviously we got that great result. Are we still needing to present the non-override budget, to town meeting? Since town meeting has to also approve the override?
Yeah, I mean, technically, town meeting could vote not to allocate the full 9.5 million. Just eligibility tax, but town meeting cannot allocate it to the schools and they choose to.
But did
I would
this-
assume
does
what
that override the townwide vote? Like, that's the part where I get confused on the timing of
well, the
this.
townwide vote is not to fund the schools.
Oh, it's
For
about. the
these
specific
positions,
number.
it's
It's about the big number.
that the
It's about
town,
that.
yeah, they voted to allow the town to levy taxes in this additional amount.
Yeah.
But I'd assume, Lizzie, like the point of the presentation really should probably just focus on the override budget.
Yeah.
And then we can
Mhm.
have information on the non-override budget.
Okay.
But you're right, it is somewhat
Yeah,
uncharted
questions.
territory for Milton. Given
I
that this is the
think
first.
maybe Nick, maybe there needs to be like a meeting with Nick to just clear up who's presenting what,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, it seems like a waste of town meetings time if really the discussion now is on the override numbers, like that's what we should discuss. And obviously if questions come up from
Yeah.
town meeting members
Sure.
related to the non-override budget for some
We
reason,
have that
we
ready.
can have some stuff, yeah, in like appendix slides.
Would have to be done technically though, do you know what I mean? It seems like a waste of time, but it's.
Well, that's what I'm,
Done,
that's what
voted
I'm,
on at town meeting,
that's what I'm wondering.
yeah.
And I know there's a meeting tomorrow at 9. There's a meeting. Damn. What is this? Okay, May, okay. Annual town meeting prep call. So. Peter and I were invited to this. Okay. Peter won't be there. Nick Milano organized this meeting.
Great.
I was obviously included as the current chair, not that tomorrow is like a new day, but I can attend this meeting, because I'm sorry, I'm looking at this. Nobody has accepted the invites. I think nobody knew what's gonna be going on.
Yep.
It's from 9 to 11 tomorrow, annual town meeting prep call. So. You want me to ask for Regina and Katie for you to be invited to that at least?
I think that probably makes sense.
See if I'm able to. I have a curriculum coordinators meeting. I will work on rescheduling that. I have it from 9 to 10. But I think also if Katie can go, are you for 9 to 11?
Mhm.
And I'm gonna join.
it was our agenda too. Well, we are organizing the work moving forward for the remainder of the year now that we've had a successful outcome, but I'm happy to,
I'm gonna email Nick. The two of you, I'm gonna copy you, and I'm just gonna say. Don't know who the chair is gonna be tomorrow. I'm available to attend. Even if I'm not the chair, but like someone has to be there to conduit the information back so that
Yes.
we can prepare.
Yep.
All right. And it has Bob Hiss on it, but.
Yeah.
He's.
Mm.
no, sure here, so, right.
Yeah, I think connecting with, to your general point, I think connecting with Nick on
Mhm.
the structure of the presentation for town meeting,
Yeah.
make sure they're aligned, and yeah, probably looping in the new moderator probably makes sense too.
Well,
She's gonna have a lot on her plate.
very tall.
I'm asking a more basic question too, is when and which night is this? Do we know yet, or that?
Town
is
meeting?
planning? No, I know in the town meetings, the presentation.
Well, it is usually typically in this meeting, we would walk through the agenda, identify what will typically. The moderator has prepared the consent agenda, which
Mhm.
pulls the anticipated less controversial articles into a consent agenda that would be presented at the beginning of town meeting. If town meeting members can like pull things out if they want the opportunity to discuss separately. But whatever stays in the consent agenda gets approved, and that just kind of, so the of the non-consent agenda items, as far as what night they'll be happening on, it really depends like how much is on the consent agenda.
Okay.
Because then the whole order of the articles, which usually goes from like front to back, gets reshuffled though.
Oh, okay.
If-
You know.
Because of the consent agenda.
Yeah, because things that were before your thing
Mhm.
Skip.
May be done.
Yeah,
might
maybe
be
not.
done
Mhm.
all in one,
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'd assume it's probably a Tuesday. I mean, usually
probably.
it's a Tuesday or Wednesday, like the school budget is
Mhm.
not on the first day. And
Yeah, the first day.
I
is
can't think
no-
of what else is.
Mhm. 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 And there's no special before the regular town meeting, correct? There's no special town meeting.
There's a special one in June.
No.
In June,
June.
but not before this one.
Well, I think, are you thinking of because the allocation for the
Oh.
700,000?
Yeah, actually.
But I think Nick had said that wasn't gonna require a special town meeting. It was just able to be incorporated within this town meeting.
Mhm.
And therefore, because otherwise that would be come first, and that'd be like the first presentation
Yep.
essentially.
Mhm.
But that's another thing. Ultimately, a lot of these things come back to, we need to like check with Nick and figure out what I won't even,
Yeah.
I'd have my warrant article book, honestly, and I have not cracked it yet. That's
Yeah.
working on the override stuff, so. I need to,
It's usually the operating budget article is usually like 6 or 7 in the warrant, but it may be different here.
yeah, it's on the website, we can pull it up, but we'll check with Nick and.
Yeah.
Get clarity.
Go from there. Mhm.
Okay, so Lizzie, you're gonna try and connect with them on school
Nick?
committee's behalf.
Yes, I'm reaching out to him right now. I'm asking him to add Katie to the invitation. And I'm just gonna explain Regina the conflict. We'll be updating her and I.
Well, I can join later too.
Oh, okay. I don't know where. I don't know if it's remote or
Hopefully it's remote.
Mhm.
I don't see any link.
Another question.
Zoom link to follow. Okay.
And then, are you gonna reach out to him about the warrant drop dead date, or would that be helpful if I did?
CC me on.
I can ask her.
Sure.
And ask him, Amy,
It would be the deadline for.
warrant article, yeah, like if we needed a article for the June,
June
when would we
special
need
town
to get
meeting.
that, yeah, to him by?
I mean, maybe.
Honestly, I assume it probably is gonna need to be before May 21st.
No, but how do
It's
you do
usually
that?
pretty
with so many-
stable. It's really good. There's
How do you
something-
do that with so many changes?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? No, I'm not, yeah.
Yeah, I really don't know, and yet tomorrow's Thursday and it's Monday, so.
Right.
Great. All right. Anything else on that? Lots of questions, but thank you for reaching out to Nick, Lizzie.
The only thing I was gonna say is, and I don't have it in front of me, but just looking again at for the 700 questions or, preemptively addressing any concerns or questions that people have about the cuts. I mean, I'm just thinking about some of that special ed. Do you know what I mean? Like is there anything that needs context?
Oh, you're talking about within the override budget.
Within because isn't it when we're going back for the additional 700?
Well, now that the override is passed,
Oh, right, we
that
don't-
700,000 is coming out of the special ed reserve fund.
Oh, right.
That $1 million
Right. That
allocation
doesn't have,
is not happening, actually. Technically, it's all, they pulled the full million out, even though they're only allocating 700,000
right.
within the warrant article to
Yeah.
us.
So the special ed reserve fund is not happening.
Well, I think the special ed reserve fund is with a $0 allocation.
Okay,
I think there's a question of whether or not we can amend the warrant article to say, allocate the 300,000. I think they pulled it out
sure.
because we weren't sure what the number was gonna be.
Mhm.
And so if the 300 is remaining,
Mhm.
is the town willing to put that into the special ed reserve account as they originally planned or not?
Right. So I think the other piece though to the 700,000 that you were talking about is our operating budget is actually reflective of that $700,000 cut because the operating budget originally for level service was 6.4 million, but
Yep.
it is funded at
Five.
the
Right.
5.7.
Point
So
Right.
that was the shift with the changes that we had proposed
Right.
and discussed at our other meetings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and all that would be covered within the override budget.
Right.
Presentation. It's confusing
Sorry, there were
because the
so many-
numbers
yeah,
are
they
the
were-
same, so I think
Right.
sometimes it gets confusing for even when we have some of our leadership team conversations. Just when we talk about the 700,000, are we talking about, because that is the operating budget stabilization fund on the town side, that's the amount that will be funded at. Then our budget was cut by 700,000, but there's also that additional 700,000 that we need to close the gap for this year. So
Right.
it's the same number, and I
Right.
think it in multiple contexts, it can get a little confusing. So I think if we can just provide the clarification.
Yeah. In terms of kind of preparing for Monday,
Mhm.
can you pull the select board presentation that we did for the $700,000 allocation to cover the current year projected deficit? You can look at those slides and any updates related to the kind of projected numbers.
So I think that was you
Yeah,
and Lizzie.
Lizzie and I
that.
went to
So
that.
did you share that with?
Oh, did we? You and I put it together? No, we all put that together. It's just y'all didn't go to it. Okay, I can look.
Maybe,
All right, I can send that to you.
okay, perfect.
I
And
just as it
will-
relates to,
Yep,
like
and
any updated
update it.
projected numbers.
Mhm,
And then
absolutely.
I can pull the presentations on the FY 26 override budget, and just create a new deck
Mhm.
with that. It'll be too many slides. It'll be too long, and then you'll tell me,
Yeah,
Mark,
cut
you need
it
to cut all these
down.
things.
Yes.
'Cause
5
They're always too
minutes.
long. So that's how we'll break
Better
it
to
up.
have too much than too
Mhm.
That's what I would say. Okay. Anything else on the town meeting or budget presentations? All right. Discussion of next meeting, dates and the agenda. You obviously got to have the reorg meeting and then figure out if the finance committee structure, people are changing. But until that point, Lizzie, we'll just continue to operate because the reorg tonight is not even selecting
No, the
boards.
reorg for tonight
Yeah.
is just chair, vice chair.
Yeah.
Our subcommittees will continue to
until,
function, especially finance.
Mhm.
So the two of you, I think, can kind of keep finance going.
Mhm.
We'll keep cross posting it so that whomever wants to attend can attend.
Mhm.
But meanwhile, typically the timing of the shuffling of subcommittees doesn't happen until the end of, it
Yeah.
happens by June. We
Yeah,
need to accomplish that by the end of this school year so that we know coming back,
Yeah.
for the next year, everybody's where they're gonna be.
great, I just wanted to confirm that. So next meetings, I don't think we should meet next week, given we have, unless we want to meet on Monday morning to look at the presentations, but otherwise, like, yeah, and I guess my proposal would be that we don't do anything next week. We'll have the town meeting presentations. And then we can meet that following Monday or Wednesday.
So the following week, the week of the 12th, I am at the Business Association Conference on Wednesday. So I will be available to meet. I'm free that I can meet on the Monday, the 12th. Or I could always meet remotely too. I could just dial into anything.
I could do Monday.
You could do Monday the 12th?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I could make it.
Do Monday the 12th. and then
Okay,
we'll have
that way, because
information.
then after the town meeting.
The after town meeting, you'll have the potentially maybe some
Mhm.
updated refined numbers.
Sure.
And hopefully we'll have the information from the town administrator on timeline for warrant articles.
Yes.
Seems like the goal for our committee kind of between now and the end of the year is just after town meeting is just the monitoring of the projected deficits
Mhm.
into next year.
Mhm.
And then any work we want to start doing around like report structures,
Yeah.
other governance kind of things within the committee.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so the 12th at 8 AM. Great. Anything else? If not, I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 9:10 AM. All in favor? Fantastic. We are adjourned. Thank you so much. Sorry for everybody on Zoom for having to just look at my face and apologize if you couldn't hear well.